It is primarily based on films about musketeers that the inhabitants of the former Soviet Union have formed an opinion regarding the life of the people who carried out the duties of executioners during the Middle Ages. These individuals were required to wear a mantle that was either blood red or black, and they were viewed with an attitude that was extremely unfriendly, wary, and contemptuous if they were locals. On the other hand, this viewpoint contains very little truth. Although there have been instances of people being sentenced to death throughout the entirety of human history, there have not always been executioners available to carry out their duties. As a result, in medieval Europe, they simply did not exist until the 10th century, and the execution of sentences was carried out by individuals who were either volunteers or recruited for a specific purpose. One of the accusers, or a less culpable accomplice of the convicted individual, could be the person in question. Additionally, some of individuals who were sentenced to death were provided with an uncommon opportunity to evade the death penalty. They were required to consent to become an executioner for additional sentences. In spite of this, it was not until the 13th century that individuals in Europe who could be referred to as professional executioners came into existence. The majority of the time, the individuals who carried out executions were regular employees of the magistrate. They were forced to take the same oath as other employees of the magistrate. They were paid a legal fixed amount, and in some places they were even compelled to wear the badge of an employee of the municipal government. By virtue of the functions that it performed, the executioner was obligated to subject the accused to torture and to punish those who were guilty. On the other hand, the executioner did not have the authority to carry out torture of his own free choice. Rather, he was only acting in accordance with the directives of a representative of the court. However, the amount that was made to the executioner varied, and while it was typically sufficient for a comfortable existence, there were instances in which it was not sufficient at all. This particular performer was given the opportunity to work part-time by the city inn, which they were operating. It was true that because it was such a part-time employment, there was typically a task that no one wanted to carry out. As a matter of fact, after all, there were not many persons who desired to utilize both implements of torture and instruments of execution. Particularly, executioners were able to supplement their income by cleaning public restrooms and taking care of brothel. On occasion, the executioners also had other sources of revenue that were unlawful, but we will discuss that in greater detail later. How the executioners were treated in society. Most people living in the current day are of the opinion that the executioners always wore masks. Before the 17th century, however, executioners simply did not wear masks. If it were not for the execution of King Charles I, it is unknown whether or not they would have emerged at all. This is a far cry from the reality of the situation. Due to the fact that the executioners did not wear masks during the execution, practically all of the citizens of the town were able to recognize them by sight. This was due to the fact that the public execution was somewhat comparable in popularity to an important modern football match. As the verdict was being carried out, large number of people gathered to watch it. Because of this, certain aspects of their lives were altered as a result of the fact that everyone knew the executioner by sight. First and foremost, during the Middle Ages, it was common practice for executioners to establish themselves outside of the settlement and later next to the prison. Because it does not take a very long time to travel to the place of employment, it was even not a negative thing. However, due to the fact that most people did not want to be in close proximity to the person who was carrying out the execution, he was required to arrive to the church at the very end and stand at the entrance. Despite the fact that the French church granted official absolution for all crimes committed by executioners while doing their professional duties, many people believed that he would be required to burn in hell without fail. There were also certain challenges that were related with the continuation of the JICE. Intermarrying with the person who carried out the execution might have been profitable, but it was a terribly unraised practice. As a result, the executioners were required to select their own wives from among the daughters of their co-workers, grave diggers, knackers, and other individuals who worked in occupations that were considered to be ignoble. Certainly, and they made an effort to prevent the children of executioners from attending school, which resulted in the profession of executioner frequently being a dynastic career. It was also unusual for the executioner to go to the market, especially when contrasted to the typical citizens of the town. Due to the fact that many merchants simply did not want to accept blood money and thereby become defiled, the essential materials were frequently provided to the person who was responsible for carrying out penalties at no cost. It is true that the Great French Revolution granted civic rights to those who carried out executions and created equality between them and other citizens of the country. The working dynasty of the Sanson, which lasted for more than 150 years from 1688 to 1847, was brought to an end as a result of this very event. Despite the fact that no one had been put to death for a considerable amount of time, the family's final executioner was compelled to use the guillotine because of outstanding obligations. When the order arrived a few days later, the usurer, despite the fact that he was pleading with him to do so, refused to lend the guillotine for a period of time. Because of this, they removed such a careless worker from their position. Unofficial earnings of executioners. It is interesting to note that during the Middle Ages, executioners had ways of earning additional money in an unofficial capacity. To begin, the families of those who were sentenced to death frequently paid additional money to the person who carried out the execution. This was done to ensure that the person who was closest to them did not experience a great deal of pain during the process. In the beginning, the thing that the executioner was allowed to take was the convict's belongings that were below the waist. It wasn't until much later that the executioners were permitted to take all of the clothes that the person who was being executed wore. There was always the possibility that I could sell it at a profit to others who were interested in a variety of rituals, even though I didn't really want to wear it. There was a widespread belief that the hangman's rope brought good fortune, which contributed to its popularity among purchasers. Nevertheless, medieval alchemists were interested in a variety of portions of the bodies of those who had been executed. There were instances in which the recipes for the philosopher's stone contained the skin or blood of those who had been condemned. Additionally, there was a viewpoint that a hand, for instance, is a wonderful amulet because it is a part of the body of the person who was executed. The bodies of those who were executed were sometimes purchased by the physicians of the Middle Ages from the individuals who carried out the executions. There were almost no other opportunities for them to study anatomy except this one. Oddly enough, the executioners had the authority to perform exorcism ceremonies despite the fact that they had a limited understanding of the various church canons pertaining to this subject. The only difference is that the clergy of the Middle Ages had the belief that the torments that the human body endures are passed to the demon that possesses it. Retirement. The executioner had a difficult time retiring from his position. It was important to provide the city with a replacement in such a specialized craft, and he had no right to abandon the field in such a manner. If there was a son who was ready to work, that would be a nice thing, otherwise you would have to look for an apprentice on the side, and then you would have to learn the craft for a number of years. Furthermore, the potential of independent professional activity for a candidate for the position of shoulder master did not become available until after the creation of a masterpiece. He had to go through a challenging examination in front of a stringent commission that was comprised of prospective colleagues.